I rise to speak on the Building and Construction Industry Improving Productivity Bill, or the legislation to bring forward the Australian Building and Construction Commission. The Australian Greens stand strongly against the reintroduction of the ABCC. The ABCC is an attack on the rights of workers, an attack on their civil rights, an attack on their rights to have a safe workplace. And in standing up to oppose this legislation today, I'm standing up for the rights of more than 1 million Australians at work. What we are presented here with this legislation by this Liberal government is a choice that goes to the very heart of what our vision is for Australian workplaces. And it's a choice that fits very clearly with this government's agenda of being on the side of big money and big business and working against the interests of ordinary, hard-working Australians. It's a return to an agenda that unites the Liberal Party where they can't be united on other things. It unites them in an agenda of union bashing and attacking the rights of ordinary workers in their workplace. With regard in particular to this legislation, it presents us with a choice to give people a balance between their work and the rest of their life, or to take that balance away. A choice for people to be able to take off important public holidays like Christmas and Easter, or to remove these protections, as this government seems intent to do. A choice between giving young people a start as apprentices or reducing these opportunities. A choice to make sure that older Australians aren't discriminated against in their workplace or not. And a choice between making sure Australians feel safe and are safe at work or not. These are the things that are under attack in this legislation, including in the building code, which is part of this legislation. For example, what's at risk in the current Electrical Trades Union construction agreement? 76 clauses of that agreement could be prohibited, and this is just one example of the targeted industries. We have a choice in this place, but if the government gets its way with these provisions in the building code, Australians who rely on these safeguards for their pay and their conditions won't have a choice. The government's being very open about this being an attack on the CFMEU, but they're more coy about the broader intention of what they are trying to achieve by reintroducing the Australian Building Construction Commission. It's a broader anti-union attack, a broader attack on the unions. The building code provision will enable the federal government to prevent local agreements having clauses for a range of matters, including guarantees on the number of apprentices. The government wants to wage war on all unions, the organisations that protect people's rights at work. And the building code won't just apply to employers tendering for government construction projects, but also to all employees working in the private sector of the entity tendering for government work, all entities that supply transport or prefabrication manufacturing to government jobs, and other entities that include contracting or transport suppliers. And when things go wrong in these workplaces, it's the unions that are stepping up and looking after the affected workers and their families. This bill will give people in the construction industry fewer rights, just because of the industry that they work in. It will give them fewer rights at work than accused criminals and even accused terrorists, in the form of a new secret police that will have the right to take workers off-site and pull them in for questioning. They won't have the right to silence. They won't be able to talk to others about the fact that they are being investigated. We may have changed Prime Ministers last year, but the government hasn't changed its spots. This bill is taking us back to the worst of the Abbott years. You can just imagine some in the coalition party room lighting up their cigars, concocting some good old-fashioned union bashing. This is the Prime Minister's attempt to trigger class warfare. The government is still seeking to divide rather than to unite. It's still governing for the big end of town, still governing for big money, for big business, while targeting those who can afford it least. and it's still playing these political games rather than governing for all Australians, including bringing us all back here for 3 weeks at the cost of millions of dollars, millions of our precious taxpayers' dollars, to try and force through the same old attacks on unions through the Parliament. And you wonder why people are sick of politicians. Let's be clear, this is purely a political attack by this government. If the government was serious about weeding out corruption, it would introduce a federal independent commission against corruption, and we will be moving an amendment to this legislation for that to occur. Our second reader amendment will be that the bill be withdrawn and redrafted to provide for the establishment of a broad-based anti-corruption watchdog, because in its current form it is an attack on workers and their unions and is not about addressing corruption at all. We've seen the consequences of such a body in the New South Wales Parliament, where giving ICAC's teeth came back to bite the Liberal Party. But at this time at the federal level, amid a huge tax avoidance scandal and after helicopter trips and dodgy donations, the coalition lacks the courage to introduce an anti-corruption body at the federal level. And this lack of courage has been made even clearer by the government refusing to support the Greens' call for a royal commission into the big banks and the financial sector, a sector where we have heard time and again of alleged misconduct, white-collar crime which has affected the lives of tens of thousands of victims. If the government was serious about tackling corruption and wrongdoing, it would get behind the Greens' call to set up a royal commission. And the Greens are similarly committed to our vision for a National Integrity Commission. And this would have 3 arms. We would have a National Integrity Commissioner who would be responsible for the investigation and prevention of misconduct and corruption in all Commonwealth departments and agencies and among federal parliamentarians and their staff. And secondly, it would have a watchdog that ensures that law enforcement has some independent oversight, so it would be responsible for the investigation and prevention of corruption in the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Crime Commission. And finally, it would have an independent parliamentary advisor who would provide independent advice to ministers and parliamentarians on conduct, ethical matters and on the appropriate use of their parliamentary entitlements. These sorts of measures are the sorts of broad-based fundamental measures that we need to see in place to be tackling issues of corruption across Australian society. But instead of such a broad-based body, the ABCC is aimed squarely at the Liberal Party's political rivals. And like any politically motivated attempt to attack your enemies, the public sees through the facade, just like they saw through the farcical and secretive Royal Commission into trade unions. And it's destined to fail. Indeed, it's failed before. The Liberals' first go at the ABCC failed as an independent regulator committed to the best interests of the industry, the conditions of people at work and the needs of legitimate employers. The first go at the ABCC was unwilling or unable to address industry employers engaging in illegal activities, including the widespread use of misleading contracts, construction companies signing up workers as independent contractors instead of hiring them as employees remains a serious issue that reduces industry standards. And for employees, it means they lose out on basic work and safety rights. The construction industry is one of this country's top 4 most dangerous industries. Yet the old ABCC never took an employer to court over breaches of occupational health and safety laws. And the number of deaths in the construction industry increased during the period that the ABCC was in operation. In 2004, the number of deaths was 3.14 per 100,000 workers. In 2007, it stood at 4.8, and in 2008, it was 4.27 per 100,000 workers. Deaths in the construction industry are an appalling thing for us to have to be living with here in our Australian workplaces. We need to have measures in place that truly address the issue of improving safety at work. And the ABCC, in its previous incarnation, was reducing safety at work. Every death on a construction site, any death at work, is something to be fought hard against. And by reintroducing the ABCC, it is certain that safety levels are going to decline, and it is certain that deaths would increase. And yet, as part of this, the coercive powers of the ABCC would subject construction industry workers to secret interrogations and force them to answer questions under oath, resulting in construction workers having fewer rights than other workers and lessening their ability to stand up for their rights at work and to stand up for the right of a safe workplace. The attempt to go back to the future with another ABCC is indicative of the failure of Prime Minister Turnbull to turn around the government from the regressive leadership of Tony Abbott. And we were promised that the rise of Mr Turnbull to the position of Prime Minister heralded a new era, that we would no longer have Tony Abbott's three-word slogans. But just then, we are hearing the government's agenda spouting the lines of the Treasurer of jobs and growth. But what is the value of jobs if people don't feel safe in their workplace? What cost is the government willing to pay for growth if mums and dads don't have time around to spend Christmas with their children? Or worse, that they aren't around to see their children grow up because of workplace accidents. The Greens believe that a person should not have fewer rights than an accused criminal simply because they work in the building industry. People shouldn't fear being hauled into secret interrogations and inquisitions and forced to name names under threat of imprisonment. We do not want or need McCarthyism in the building industry. The Greens and the Australian people see this for what it really is, an attack on people's rights at work and a distraction from dealing with the very real issues of corruption and wrongdoing that span every industry. We will always stand up for people's rights at work, and we urge all senators to reject this legislation and not support this bill. In doing so, I also now move the second reading amendment standing in my name.